The rain came down in sheets, not the gentle rain of earth, the kind that whispered promises of spring and renewal. This rain fell hard and cold, each drop striking the dark stone of the spaceport landing pad like a hammer on an anvil. Garrett Stone stood at the bottom of his ship's cargo ramp, face tilted toward a purple sky he'd never seen before, and let the alien water wash over him. 48 years old, 28 of them spent in uniform, and for the first time in his adult life, he had nowhere he needed to be. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it sat in his chest like a stone. His ship, the Wandering Ghost, hissed and clicked behind him as her engines cooled. She was old, scarred from a dozen conflicts across the frontier. But she was his. Bought with hazard pay and blood money, every credit earned the hard way. The plan had been simple: fly to Sarath, a backwater planet at the edge of known space purchase. A piece of land in the mountains where no one would ask questions, and build something resembling peace. A simple plan. Clean, final. The universe had other ideas. Your vessel requires 12 hours for refueling and atmospheric recalibration. The port authority's voice crackled through his comm. Storm front moving in from the eastern quadrant. All outbound flights grounded until further notice. Garrett pressed his thumb against the comm unit at his collar. Understood. How long? Static. Then could be 6 hours, could be 3 days. This is Sarath. The weather does what it wants. He killed the connection and stood there in the rain, watching it pool in the divots and scars of the landing pad. Behind him, the Ghost cargo hold held everything he owned. A footlocker of clothes, another of weapons he'd told himself he'd never touch again, and a third containing the ashes of everyone he'd failed to save at Novara Station. The massacre had been 2 years ago. He still smelled the smoke every morning when he woke. Move along, outsider. A harsh voice cut through the rain. This platform is for authorized personnel. Garrett turned. A figure in ceremonial armor stood at the edge of the pad, violet skin gleaming, wet silver hair plastered against a skull that was almost human, but not quite. 4 eyes arranged in vertical pairs regarded him with open contempt. The armor was elaborate, engraved with symbols Garrett didn't recognize, but the weapon at the being's hip was universal in its meaning. Just waiting out the storm, Garrett said, keeping his voice neutral. My ship's being serviced. Then wait somewhere else. The arena grounds are no place for... A horn sounded, deep, resonant, carrying across the rain-soaked plateau, despite the storm. The armored figure's head snapped toward the sound, all 4 eyes narrowing. It begins, the guard muttered, then seemed to remember Garrett existed. You, human. If you value your life, you'll return to your vessel and seal the hatch. What happens in the circle of blades is not for foreign eyes. Then he was gone, moving with a speed that shouldn't have been possible in that much armor. Garrett stood alone on the platform. The smart play would be to do exactly what the guard said. Return to the Ghost, sleep. Wake up when the storm passed and never look back. But the horn sounded again, and this time Garrett heard something underneath it. Voices, hundreds of them, rising and falling like a tide. And beneath that, the distinctive ring of metal on metal. He'd been a Colonial Marine Force recon officer for 28 years. He knew the sound of combat when he heard it. His feet were moving before he'd consciously made the decision. The circle of blades sat in a natural amphitheater carved from black volcanic stone. Rows of seats descended toward a central fighting platform, currently packed with hundreds of the violet-skinned aliens the guard had represented. They were beautiful in a way that made Garrett's chest tight, elegant, dangerous, their silver hair catching what little light penetrated the storm clouds overhead. He found a spot beneath an overhang, at the back, water dripping from his coat, and watched. 2 figures occupied the center platform. One was massive, easily 7 feet tall, shoulders broad enough to carry siege equipment. The other was smaller, more slender, but moved with a grace that spoke of years of training. Both wore black combat suits that hugged their bodies like second skins, silver straps and buckles, forming intricate patterns across their torsos. Both carried swords that seemed to drink the light. The larger fighter pressed forward, each strike heavy enough to crack stone. The smaller one gave ground, parrying, deflecting, but Garrett could see the exhaustion in the way their shoulders had begun to drop, the slight hesitation before each block. Who are they? He asked, not expecting an answer. The female is Alara Thane, last daughter of a fallen house. The voice belonged to an elderly alien, wizened and bent, who'd appeared at Garrett's elbow without sound. The male is Vorik Kane, champion of the Ascendant clan. He fights to claim her family's ancestral lands. Garrett's eyes tracked the fight. And if she wins... The elder's laugh was bitter. She will not win. Her clan has fallen too far. This is merely formality. The question is whether she dies with honor or is broken first. On the platform, Vorik landed a crushing blow that sent Ilara sprawling. Her sword skittered across wet stone, coming to rest 10 feet away. The crowd roared. Garrett had seen this before. Different planets, different species, but the pattern was always the same. The strong took from the weak, and everyone called it honor. Ilara struggled to her hands and knees, silver hair hanging in wet curtains around her face. She was bleeding from a dozen cuts, indigo blood mixing with the rain. But she didn't stay down. Hand over hand, she crawled toward her blade. Shirem, "Yield, daughter of nothing," Vorik's voice boomed across the arena. "Your father's blade deserves a stronger hand." "I will die," Ilara panted, fingers closing around the sword's hilt, "before I yield my family's honor." Something in Garrett's chest cracked. He'd spent nearly 3 decades watching good people die for causes that didn't matter, for orders that made no sense, for leaders who sent them into meat grinders and called it strategy. He'd sworn at Novara, standing among the bodies of 200 Marines who'd trusted him, that he was done. No more impossible fights. No more lost causes. No more deaths he couldn't prevent. But then Vorik raised his blade for a killing blow, and Garrett was already moving. He hit the barrier at the edge of the platform at a dead run, vaulting over it, with muscle memory from 1,000 boarding actions. The crowd's roar changed pitch, confusion, replacing bloodlust. Vorik's blade was already descending in a silver arc that would split Ilara's skull. Garrett's hand closed around the hilt of her sword. The world exploded. Not physically. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. But the moment his fingers touched the ancient metal, Garrett's mind opened like a door he didn't know existed. Images crashed through him in a torrent. Battlefields smoking under alien suns, desperate, last stands in corridors of stone lovers, holding each other as cities burned behind them. Children being blessed with blades too heavy for their small hands. And beneath it all, a single name repeated like a prayer. Thane. 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 400 years of memory in the space between heartbeats. Then Vorik's blade met Ilara's, and the shock of impact jarred Garrett back to the present. His arms sang with the force of the blow, bones rattling, but he held, braced his feet, pushed back against a warrior who outweighed him by 100 pounds and had been training since before Garrett was born. The blade in his hands burned hot as a brand. Vorik stepped back, all 4 eyes wide, with something Garrett couldn't identify. Around them, the crowd had gone silent. Even the rain seemed to pause. "This isn't your fight, human," Vorik said, voice low and dangerous. Garrett adjusted his grip. The sword felt alive in his hands, warm and eager. "Seemed unfair to kill someone who's already down." "You fool." Ilara's voice was barely a whisper. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Before Garrett could respond, the elderly alien he'd spoken to earlier pushed through the crowd, followed by others in elaborate ceremonial robes. They stared at Garrett with expressions ranging from shock to outrage to something that might have been amusement. "The blade has been claimed," the elder announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent arena. "By ancient law, unbroken since the first dawn, he who wields the clan sword in defense of its bearer becomes bound to that bearer in sacred oath." Garrett blinked. Rain ran down his face, mixing with sweat. What? You have claimed the right to be Ilara Thane's oath shield," the elder continued, implacable as stone. "The duel is suspended. The rite of binding must now commence." Garrett looked down at Ilara, who was staring at him with an expression that suggested she couldn't decide whether to thank him or stab him with the very blade he'd just used to save her life. "I was just trying to help," he said weakly. "Help," she hissed the word like a curse, struggling to her feet. "You've just bound yourself to a dying clan on a planet you know nothing about. The blade chooses human, and it has chosen you. There is no escape from this. For either of us." The weight of 100 alien eyes pressed down on Garrett. He'd faced down pirates, corporate death squads, and hostile wildlife on a dozen worlds. He'd walked through fire at Novara and come out the other side still breathing. But nothing had prepared him for this. He'd come to this planet for a simple refueling stop. Somewhere in the last 10 minutes, his simple retirement plan had gone to hell, and he was now apparently engaged in some kind of sacred military bond with a woman he'd never even spoken to. The sword in his hand pulsed, once warm and insistent, as if reminding him that simple was never really an option. Around him, the crowd began to murmur, some angry, some confused. But underneath it all, Garrett heard something else. Hope. And he realized with the sick certainty of a man who'd just stepped into a trap that he was well and truly caught. The Hall of Ancestors was carved directly into the mountain's heart. Garrett followed Ilara through corridors of black stone veined with silver, each step echoing in spaces that had witnessed centuries of history. She moved stiffly, favoring her left side where Vorik's blade had caught her ribs, but she didn't slow down. didn't look back to see if he followed. She didn't need to. The weight of the oath was already settling onto Garrett's shoulders like chains. "You can't seriously expect me to go through with this," he said to her back. "What I expect is irrelevant." Her voice echoed off ancient stone. "The blade chose you. That is all that matters. A sword can't choose anything. It's an inanimate object." That made her stop. She turned, and for the first time Garrett got a good look at her. Up close, he could see that her eyes weren't entirely black as he'd first thought. Tiny flecks of silver danced within them like distant stars. Her face was angular, beautiful in the way a knife was beautiful, all clean lines and sharp edges. Blood still crusted the corner of her mouth. "The Iron Heart blade," she said, voice low and intense, "has been forged in the blood of my ancestors for 16 generations. It carries the essence of our lineage. When you grasped it in defense of my life, it recognized something in you worthy of continuing our line." "Where I come from," Garrett said carefully, "sacred bonds require informed consent. I didn't know what I was agreeing to. Where you come from is irrelevant now." She cut him off, something harder entering her voice. "You're here, and you've invoked ancient law. My clan stands on the brink of extinction. Our territories are being seized, our people scattered. That duel was my last chance to preserve what little remains of our honor. And now," she stopped. A complex emotion flickered across her face. "And now we have possibilities," she said quietly. "Unexpected ones." Before Garrett could press further, they arrived at a set of massive doors inlaid with silver patterns that seemed to shift in the dim light. Two guards stood at attention, their expressions hardening at the sight of Garrett. "The council await," one said, not bothering to hide his contempt. The chamber beyond was circular with a domed ceiling that revealed the stormy sky through sections of transparent crystal. 7 elderly aliens sat in a semicircle, their elaborate robes and silver facial markings denoting status Garrett didn't understand. The central figure, a female with hair so long it pooled on the floor around her, raised a gnarled hand as they entered. "Approach, daughter of Thane," she commanded. "Bring your chosen." Alara straightened despite her injuries and walked forward with dignity that made Garrett's chest tight. He followed, acutely aware of how out of place his weathered flight jacket and cargo pants looked in this formal setting. "High Elder Nissa," Ilara bowed. "I present Garrett Stone of Earth, a human." "A human?" Nissa's voice dripped with disdain. "You bring a human before the sacred circle and claim him as Oath Shield." "I claim nothing," Ilara responded, voice steady. "The blade chose." Murmurs rippled through the assembled elders. One male with particularly elaborate silver facial markings leaned forward. "This is unprecedented. No outsider has ever wielded a clan blade." "Perhaps," another elder snapped, "because no outsider has ever been foolish enough to interfere in clan matters." Nissa raised her hand for silence. "The law is absolute. If the blade accepted his touch in your defense, then the oath is formed." Her gaze shifted to Garrett. "However, the question remains whether this human understands what he has committed himself to." With all due respect, Garrett stepped forward. "I don't. I saw someone about to be killed and I acted. Where I come from, that's just basic decency." "Decency," Nissa repeated the word as if tasting something unfamiliar. "An interesting concept, yet irrelevant. The blade does not recognize decency. It recognizes strength, honor, and bloodline compatibility." "Bloodline compatibility," Garrett frowned. "You mean yes, human?" Nissa's eyes glittered. "The blade would not have accepted your touch if your genetic structure was incompatible with continuing the Thane line. This is unexpected." A commotion at the chamber entrance interrupted them. Vorik strode in, flanked by his own entourage. His massive frame seemed to fill the room with menace. "This farce has gone on long enough," he boomed. The human interfered in sacred combat. The duel was not concluded. "The duel became irrelevant," Nissa responded coolly, "the moment he claimed the blade." Vorik's 4 eyes narrowed to slits. "I challenge the validity of this oath. The human knows nothing of our ways. He cannot possibly fulfill the duties of an oath shield." That, Nissa acknowledged, is a legitimate concern. Ilara stepped forward. "By law, he has 1 full cycle of our moons to prove his worthiness. During this time, he is under clan protection." "A cycle," Vorik laughed harshly. "I'll need far less time than that to prove him unworthy." He turned his gaze to Garrett. "Human, do you even know what duties you have claimed? You must defend clan territories, participate in council, stand as Thane's blade against all who would see it broken. And I suppose," Garrett said quietly, "you're first in line." Something flickered in Vorik's eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a fellow predator. The human will be instructed in his duties, Alara stated firmly, and I will vouch for his capacity to learn. Bold words from the daughter of a fallen house, Vorik sneered. Very well, one cycle. Then we shall see if your human pet can stand as a true oath shield, or if he will flee back to the stars where he belongs. After Vorik stormed out, Nissa fixed Garrett with a penetrating stare. You have much to learn in very little time, human. Your actions have consequences beyond what you can imagine. Story of my life, Garrett muttered. Later, as Alara led him through winding corridors to what would apparently be his quarters, Garrett finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind. Why didn't you just let me leave? You could have told them I didn't know what I was doing. Alara stopped, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Because the moment you wielded that blade, you became my clan's last hope. Without you, Vorik would have killed me today, and the Thane line would have ended. She hesitated. With you, there is a chance, a small one, but more than I had this morning. A chance for what exactly? Her gaze met his fierce and unyielding. A chance to rebuild, to reclaim what was stolen from us, to ensure that my family's sacrifices were not in vain. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the unfamiliar spice of her skin. You may not have chosen this, Garrett Stone, but neither did I. We are bound now by blood and honor. The only question is whether you will run from that bond or embrace it. With that, she turned and continued down the corridor, leaving Garrett to wonder just what kind of storm he'd flown into and whether he had any hope of navigating his way through it. The quarters they'd assigned him were Spartan but functional. Stone walls, a sleeping platform with furs he didn't recognize, a narrow window that looked out over dark mountains disappearing into storm clouds. He stood there for a long time watching lightning fork across an alien sky and thought about the choices that had brought him here. At Navarra Station, he'd made a choice. 200 colonial Marines under his command. Intelligence said the station was lightly defended. Intelligence was wrong. By the time they realized it was a trap, half his people were already dead. The other half died trying to fight their way out. Garrett had survived. He always survived. And he'd sworn on their ashes that he was done making choices that got good people killed. Yet here he stood, bound by oath to a dying clan, facing an enemy he didn't understand, holding a sword that whispered secrets he couldn't quite hear. The blade rested against the wall where he'd placed it, but even from across the room, Garrett could feel its presence, like a living thing watching, waiting. He turned away from the window and began the slow, painful process of removing his jacket. His body was a map of scars from 100 battles. Plasma burns on his left shoulder, shrapnel wounds across his ribs, the long, ragged line down his back where a pirate's blade had nearly ended him. Every single one of those years in uniform had left its mark. He was too old for this, too tired, too haunted by the faces of the dead. But the blade whispered, and in its whisper, Garrett heard something he'd thought he'd lost at Navarra. Purpose. He hated it. Hated the way it felt like a hook in his chest pulling him towards something he didn't want. Hated the way Alara's words echoed in his mind. We are bound now by blood and honor. He'd come to Sereth to die quietly, to build a small house in the mountains and disappear into the kind of peace he'd never earned but desperately needed. Instead, he'd found another war. The storm outside intensified, rain hammering against stone with renewed fury. Garrett lay down on the sleeping platform and closed his eyes, knowing sleep wouldn't come. It never did on the first night in a new place. The ghosts always followed too close. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw them. The Marines at Navarra. Young faces, trusting faces, faces that had believed him when he said they'd make it out alive. He saw them falling one by one while he lived. Always lived. And now he'd bound himself to another doomed cause, another fight he couldn't win. The blade pulsed once warm light spilling across the room. Garrett's eyes snapped open. The sword was glowing. Soft, silver light emanated from the runes carved into its blade, casting strange shadows on the stone walls. As he watched, the light intensified and images began to form in the air above it. Not his ghost this time. Someone else's. He saw a man standing in a chamber he didn't recognize, violet skin marked with silver patterns that denoted high status. The man was older, gray, threading through his silver hair, but he carried himself with the bearing of a warrior. He held a cup ornate and ceremonial, and as Garrett watched, he brought it to his lips. The vision shifted. The same man, but now lying on a stone floor, body convulsing. Foam at his lips, eyes wide with the knowledge of betrayal. His hand reached out, clawing at air, and Garrett heard words that shouldn't have been possible to hear. Protect the vault! Then the man was still. Dead, and the vision faded. Garrett was on his feet before he'd consciously decided to move, hand already reaching for the blade. The moment his fingers closed around the hilt, another wave of images crashed through him. Clearer this time, more focused. The same chamber, different angle. And there in the shadows, a figure in a hooded cloak placing the cup on a table before disappearing through a side door. Murder, not illness, not accident, assassination. And as the blade's light faded, Garrett understood. The man in the vision was Lord Keothane, Alara's father, and someone had poisoned him. Morning came cold and gray. Garrett found Alara in the training hall, moving through weapon forms with a precision that spoke of decades of practice. Each movement fluid, economical. Beautiful in the way a predator was beautiful. She'd wrapped her ribs tight, covering the worst of yesterday's injuries, but he could see the pain in the careful way she held herself. She completed the sequence and turned to find him watching. "You should be resting," she said. "'Cause should you?" He gestured to her bandaged torso. Those cuts were deep. "My physical condition is irrelevant compared to the task at hand, which is turning you into a proper oath shield in record time." Garrett crossed the training hall floor, wet stone cold against his boots. "Before we start, there's something you need to know." Something in his tone made her go still. "What?" "The blade showed me something last night. A vision." He watched her face carefully. "Your father. The way he died." All the color drained from Alara's face. "What did you see?" "Poison. In his evening cup. Someone in a hooded cloak placing it there and leaving." Garrett kept his voice gentle. "It wasn't natural causes, was it?" For a long moment, Alara didn't speak. Then quietly, "No, it wasn't. You knew." "I suspected." Her hands clenched at her sides. "But I had no proof. My father was beloved by many, feared by others. When he died suddenly, the council declared it a failure of his heart. Natural. Peaceful." Her voice went hard. "Lies. All of it lies." "The blade wouldn't show me this without reason," Garrett said. "There's more to this, isn't there?" Alara turned away, moving to the weapons rack along the wall. She ran her fingers over a practice sword, not looking at him. 3 days before he died, my father told me he'd discovered something. Something that would change everything. He wouldn't tell me what. Said it was too dangerous, that knowing would put me at risk." Her laugh was bitter. "He was trying to protect me, as always." "Did he say anything else?" "Only 2 words." She met his eyes. "Protect the vault." The same words Garrett had heard in the vision. "What vault?" "The Thane ancestral vault. Deep beneath the mountain, sealed for generations. Only the lord of the house can open it using blood and oath." She paused. "My father was the last person to enter. Whatever he found there, it cost him his life." Garrett's mind raced, connecting pieces. And now someone else wants access. Vorik. The name came out like a curse. "His claim to our territories has legal merit under old law, but I've always suspected there was more to it. He's been methodical, systematic, taking our outer holdings first, then working inward." She gestured to a map on the wall, territories marked in different colors. "See the pattern?" Garrett studied it. She was right. The seized territories formed a spiral narrowing toward the mountain's heart, toward where the vault would be. "He's not after land," Garrett said slowly. "He's after whatever's in that vault." "But he can't open it, not without—" Alara stopped, eyes widening. "The oath shield." "What?" "The vault requires 2 keys. The Lord's bloodline and the sworn blade. My father could open it because he was both Lord and warrior. But with him gone, I'm the bloodline, but I'm not." She looked at Garrett with dawning horror. "You are the sworn blade now. Together we can open it. Which means Vorik needs one of us alive long enough to access the vault. Then we both become expendable." Garrett felt the trap closing. "That's why he didn't kill you outright yesterday. He needs you. And now he needs you too." Alara's expression hardened. "We have to find out what's in that vault. What my father died protecting." "Agreed. But we need to be smart about this." Garrett moved to the map, studying the pattern of seized territories. "Vorik's playing a long game. He won't move directly, not yet. He'll test us first. Push to see how much we know, how strong the oath bond really is. Then we give him what he expects," Alara said. "An ignorant human stumbling through customs he doesn't understand, barely able to hold a blade. While we investigate quietly." Garrett nodded. "Can you get me access to your father's chambers? His personal effects. They've been sealed since his death. But as his daughter, I can petition the council." She met his eyes. "This is dangerous, Garrett. If Vorik suspects we're investigating—" "He already suspects. That's why he challenged the oath." Garrett picked up a practice sword from the rack, testing its weight. But suspicion isn't proof. We just need to be careful and fast. Then we should begin your training. If you're to fool Vorik into thinking you're incompetent, you'll need to know enough to make your mistakes look convincing. The next 2 weeks blurred together in a haze of training and investigation. Alara worked him hard, drilling him in the basics of Sarath's swordplay until his muscles screamed. The forms were different from Earth combat styles, more flowing, emphasizing circular motion over linear strikes. But the principles remained the same. Balance, timing, reading your opponent. Garrett had been fighting for nearly 3 decades. His body knew violence the way other people knew breathing. But he played the struggling student, making obvious mistakes, taking hits he could have avoided. And all the while he watched Vorik's spies, watching him cataloging every failure, every stumble. At night, when the training halls were empty, the real work began. Alara secured access to her father's chambers, and Garrett went through them with the methodical precision of a colonial marine intelligence officer. Lord Kale had been careful, leaving no obvious evidence. But careful men made patterns, and patterns could be read. He found the journal on the 8th night, hidden behind a loose stone in the chamber wall. The entries were written in Sarath script, but Alara translated, her voice growing softer with each page. Lord Kyle had suspected the corruption went deep. Council members taking bribes from off-world interests, territories sold to the highest bidder, and at the center of it all, a name that appeared again and again, Orthonan Consortium. They're weapons dealers, Alara explained, one of the largest in the sector. They've been trying to establish a foothold on Sarath for years, but our laws prohibit foreign military presence. So they buy their way in. Garrett studied the journal entries. Your father was building a case against them. Evidence of bribes, illegal arms sales. He looked up. This would have destroyed half the council and gotten him killed before he could present it. Alara's hands shook as she turned the page. But why? What does any of this have to do with our vault? The answer came 3 pages later in an entry dated 2 days before Lord Kale's death. I have confirmed the legend. Worldbreaker is real. The weapon our ancestors used to terraform Sarath still exists, sealed in the deep vault. If Orthonan discovers this, they will stop at nothing to claim it. A weapon that can destroy planets or rebuild them, the strategic value is beyond calculation. I must find a way to seal it permanently, even if it costs me everything. Garrett and Alara stared at each other across the journal. A planet killer, Garrett said quietly. That's what they're after. And Vorik is their tool. Alara's expression went cold. He's been working for them all along. The territorial claims, the honor duels, all of it theater to get close to the vault. We need to get there first, see what we're dealing with. No, Alara shook her head. The vault requires both of us. If we go now, they'll know we've figured it out. We need more time, more information. She was right, but Garrett's instincts screamed at him to act. In his experience, waiting only gave your enemies time to prepare. But this wasn't Navarra. He wasn't in command here, and rushing in had already cost him 200 lives. We wait, he agreed, but not for long. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Vorik sent formal notification to the council. He was invoking his right to challenge Garrett's worthiness as Oath Shield through the trial of 3 ancient tests of body, mind, and spirit that would prove whether the oath bond was genuine. He's forcing our hand, Alara said, reading the formal document. The trials begin in 4 days. And what happens if I fail? The oath is dissolved. I lose all remaining territories to Vorik's claim. And, she hesitated, and you're exiled from Sarath. Permanently. Garrett stood at the window of his chambers, looking out over the mountains where he'd planned to build his peaceful retreat. 4 weeks ago, he'd been a retired soldier looking for a quiet place to die. Now he was bound by sacred oath to a woman he barely knew, investigating a murder, and facing trials designed by a culture he didn't understand. The blade rested against the wall, silent now, but he could feel it watching, waiting. These trials, he said, what do they involve? The trial of Blade's single combat against a champion of Vorik's choosing. The trial of command, a test of strategy and tactical thinking. And the trial of the vault. She stopped. The vault, Garrett turned. He's going to make accessing the vault part of the trials. It's traditional for the final test. The Oath Shield must prove he can access the sacred places of the clan. Alara's expression was grim. He'll argue it's the ultimate proof of legitimacy, and the council will agree. Which means he gets exactly what he wants. Legal access to the vault with the council's blessing. And we have no choice but to comply. Refusing the trials would be admitting the oath is false. Garrett ran a hand through his hair, thinking. 4 days. Not enough time to gather more evidence, not enough time to expose the conspiracy. Vorik had planned this perfectly. But perfect plans had weaknesses. They always did. You just had to find them. Then we use the trials, Garrett said. We give Vorik what he thinks he wants. Access to the vault. But on our terms. How? I need to know everything about Worldbreaker. Everything your father knew, everything the legends say. If it's as powerful as the journal suggests, there have to be safeguards. Protocols. Alara nodded slowly. There are. The weapon is keyed to Thane bloodline. Only someone carrying our genetic markers can activate it. So even if Vorik gets into the vault, he can't use it without you. Correct, which means he needs to keep you alive, at least until he figures out a way around the genetic lock. Garrett's mind raced. That's our leverage. That's our window. You're suggesting we let him think he's won, let him access the vault during the trials, and use that time to expose his connection to Orthonon. Once the Council knows he's been working with off-world weapons dealers, his legal claims become void. And more importantly, they'll have to act to secure Worldbreaker before Orthonon makes a move. It was a dangerous plan. A lot of things could go wrong, but it was better than waiting for Vorik to make his move. Alara studied him for a long moment. You think like a soldier. I was a soldier for a long time. And now I'm trying to figure out what I am. Garrett met her eyes. Your father's journal mentioned Novara Station. You looked it up, didn't you? She didn't deny it. 200 Marines, only one survivor. You. I was their commanding officer. The report said it was an ambush, intelligence failure, not your fault. I was in command. It's always my fault. Garrett turned back to the window. That's why I came here, to Sarath, as far from the frontier as I could get. I was done fighting, done making choices that got people killed. And yet here you are. Here I am. He laughed, but there was no humor in it, bound by oath to another losing fight. Alara crossed the room to stand beside him. My father used to say that the blade chooses not the strongest warrior, but the one who understands what's worth fighting for. She looked at him, the silver flecks dancing in her dark eyes. Perhaps it saw something in you that you don't see in yourself. Or perhaps it made a mistake. The blade doesn't make mistake. Outside storm clouds gathered again over the mountains. In 4 days, the trials would begin. And Garrett Stone, retired Colonial Marine officer, reluctant oath shield, and man who'd sworn never to fight again, would step into the arena. The blade pulsed once warm and steady. Garrett rested his hand on the hilt and felt the weight of ancient oaths settling onto his shoulders. Felt the ghosts of Novara watching. Felt the future narrowing to a single point. He'd come here to escape, to hide, to die quietly. Instead, he'd found another war. The only question now was whether he'd survive it, or whether this time he'd finally earned the right to fall with those he led. The blade had no answer, only silence, and the promise of blood to come. The arena floor was black stone polished smooth by centuries of blood. Garrett stood at its center, bare-chested in the traditional manner, old scars mapping his torso like a battlefield casualty report. Plasma burns, shrapnel wounds. The long, ragged line where a pirate's blade had nearly ended him on a ship whose name he'd forgotten. Decades of violence written in scar tissue. Across from him, Draven waited. Vorik's champion was 28, prime fighting age. All coiled muscle and perfect violet skin, unmarked by time or error. 4 eyes tracked Garrett with the cold assessment of a predator sizing up prey that should already be dead. The crowd filled every seat in the circle of blades. Thousands of them alien faces turned toward the center platform, waiting for the human to fail. To prove that the oath was a mistake, that the blade had chosen wrong, that outsiders would always be outsiders, no matter what ancient laws said. Garrett could feel their hunger for his humiliation. He'd felt it before. Different planets, different species, always the same. High Elder Nissa stood at the edge of the platform, her voice carrying across the arena despite the wind. The trial of blades will test the Oath Shield's physical worthiness. Victory proves strength. Defeat proves nothing, she paused. The challenge ends when one combatant yields or is rendered unconscious. Lethal force is forbidden. Her eyes settled on Draven with that last point, and Garrett understood. The young champion was known for pushing boundaries. You may begin, Nissa said, and stepped back. Draven moved first, closing the distance in a blur of speed that shouldn't have been possible. His blade came in high, a strike designed to test defenses, and Garrett barely got his own sword up in time to parry. The impact jarred his arms to the shoulder. His ribs still healing from the training accidents he'd staged to convince Vork's spies he was incompetent, screamed in protest. Draven smiled, all four eyes bright with anticipation. "I've never fought a human before," the champion said, voice melodic despite the violence in his movements. "I hear your kind bleeds red. I look forward to confirming this." Garrett didn't waste breath on a response. He was already moving years of combat training overriding conscious thought. Sidestep, parry, deflect. Don't try to match his speed, you can't. Use his momentum against him. The next strike came low, aimed at Garrett's leading leg. He shifted weight, let the blade pass close enough to feel the wind of its passage, and countered with a slash toward Draven's exposed side. The champion recovered instantly, spinning with inhuman grace to block. But for a fraction of a second, surprise flickered across his face. The human was faster than expected. They circled each other, boots sliding across wet stone. The rain had started again, turning the arena floor treacherous. Thunder rumbled overhead, and lightning forked across purple clouds. Draven attacked again this time, a combination high-low-high, each strike flowing into the next with practiced precision. Garrett gave ground defending, but he was reading the pattern now, seeing where the openings would be. On the fourth exchange, Draven's blade slipped past Garrett's guard and scored a shallow cut across his ribs. The crowd roared. First blood to Vork's champion. Pain flared hot and immediate. Garrett glanced down, saw crimson blood mixing with the rain. Different color than the indigo that flowed in Sereth's veins, stark against his pale skin. "First blood to Cain," Vork called from his seat, voice smug with satisfaction. Garrett touched the cut fingers coming away red. He looked at Draven, then at the crowd, then back at his opponent. And he smiled, because pain was an old friend. Pain meant you were still alive. Pain meant you could still fight. "My turn," Garrett said quietly. He came in fast, abandoning the defensive posture, pressing the attack. Not trying to match Draven's speed or technique, that was suicide. Instead, he fought like a colonial marine who'd spent 3 decades in boarding actions and bar fights across 100 stations. Dirty, efficient, brutal. When Draven lunged, Garrett didn't parry. He stepped into the attack, taking a glancing blow to his shoulder in exchange for getting inside the champion's guard. Before Draven could adjust, Garrett slammed his forehead directly into the bridge of the alien's nose. The headbutt wasn't elegant. It wasn't honorable. It definitely wasn't traditional Sereth combat technique, but it worked. Draven staggered back, indigo blood springing from his crushed nose. The crowd went silent, then erupted in outraged shouts. "Dishonorable, someone yelled. "Unsanctioned technique." "Foul blow." High Elderness's voice cut through the commotion. "Unconventional, but within the rules of combat. The trial continues." Draven wiped his face, smearing blood across Violet's skin. His expression had changed. The confident predator was gone. In its place stood something harder, more dangerous. "So humans do have some fight in them," he said. The battle continued, each combatant adjusting to the other's style. Draven was faster, stronger, trained since childhood in techniques passed down through generations. But Garrett had something the young champion lacked: experience, and the kind of meanness you only learn by surviving fights you should have lost. He took more cuts. Draven opened a gash across his left bicep, another along his ribs, a third across his cheek that filled his mouth with the copper taste of blood. But Garrett landed his own strikes using earth grappling techniques that no Sereth warrior would expect. Minutes stretched into a half hour. Both fighters slowed, exhaustion creeping in. Garrett's lungs burned. His ribs felt like broken glass with each breath. Not young, not for this kind of combat. In the crowd, he glimpsed Alara, her face tight with tension, hands clenched at her sides, watching him fight for her honor, her house, her future. Something in Garrett's chest cracked open. He'd spent 2 years running from responsibility, from command, from the weight of other people's lives depending on his choices. At Novara, that weight had crushed him, broken something fundamental. But here now, fighting for someone who believed the blade had chosen correctly, he felt it. Purpose. And he hated how good it felt. When Draven launched another combination, a flurry of strikes that should have overwhelmed any defense, Garrett found reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed. He ducked under a horizontal slash, dropped his sword, grabbed Draven's wrist with both hands, and used the alien's own momentum to flip him over his shoulder. It was a basic grappling move, something they taught in week 2 of boot camp. Draven crashed to the whetstone with bone-jarring force. Before he could recover, Garrett had scooped up his fallen blade and placed it at the champion's throat. "Yield!" Garrett panted, blood and rain running down his face. For a long moment, Draven's 4 eyes blazed with defiance. Then remarkably he smiled. "I yield," the champion said to the human oath shield of Thane. The arena erupted, cheers and angry shouts mixing together in a wave of sound. Garrett stepped back, offering his hand. Draven took it, allowing himself to be pulled to his feet in a gesture that clearly surprised the watching crowd. "You fight strangely," Draven acknowledged, "but effectively. Different worlds, different techniques." Garrett swayed slightly, adrenaline fading and leaving only pain. "But the principles stay the same." Vork's face was a mask of barely controlled fury as High Elder Nissa stepped forward. "The first ordeal is complete," she announced. "Garrett Stone has proven his physical worthiness." As medics rushed forward to tend both fighters, Alara met Garrett at the edge of the platform. Her eyes were bright with emotion he couldn't identify. "That was," she began, "completely improvised." Garrett finished, accepting a cloth to press against the cut on his ribs. "Your training helped, but I figured my best chance was to surprise him." "You certainly did that." A smile tugged at her lips. "I've never seen any headbutt a clan champion before." First time for everything. In a private chamber adjacent to the arena, though Alara helped clean and dress his wounds. Her touch was clinical, at first efficient, but gradually it softened, fingers lingering on his skin as she worked. Garrett found himself watching her face, the play of emotions across angular features, concern, relief, and something deeper that made his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with combat. "I didn't think you'd win," she admitted quietly, applying a healing salve to the cut on his shoulder. "Thanks for the vote of confidence." "It's not that," her fingers stilled on his skin. "Draven has defeated warriors with decades more training than you've had. What you did out there was remarkable." Garrett caught her hand before she could withdraw it. "Maybe your blade knew what it was doing when it chose me." Their eyes met. For a moment, the air between them seemed charged with possibilities neither had expected. Alara's gaze dropped to his lips, then back to his eyes, darker violet spreading across her cheeks. Then a sharp knock interrupted. "Second ordeal begins in 20 minutes, a voice called through the door. Alara pulled away her composure, returning like a mask sliding into place. "We should prepare." But something had shifted between them. Some barrier had cracked, letting light through. The command chamber was a vast circular room dominated by a holographic display that filled the space above a sunken arena. Garrett stood at one control station, Vorik at another 20 feet away. Between them, a three-dimensional battlefield flickered to life. This was the trial of command. High Elder Nissa explained the rules. You will each command virtual forces in a tactical scenario. The objective: rescue hostages from a fortified enemy position with limited resources. Victory goes to the commander who completes the objective with minimal casualties. You have 1 hour. The hologram solidified. A mountain fortress heavily defended. Guard towers, minefields, kill zones with overlapping fields of fire. And at its heart, a detention block holding 50 hostages. Garrett studied the terrain with an officer's eye. It was a nightmare scenario. A frontal assault would be suicide. The defenses were too strong, too well positioned. Whoever designed this expected traditional tactics, which meant traditional tactics would fail. He glanced at Vorik, saw the larger alien already moving virtual units into position. A three-pronged assault. Diversionary force here, main thrust there, reserve units held back for exploitation. Textbook, professional, and exactly what the scenario wanted them to do. Garrett smiled. For the next hour, he didn't think about honor or oaths or ancient blades that whispered in the dark. He thought like a colonial Marine Force recon officer who'd spent nearly 3 decades fighting enemies with superior numbers and better positions. He thought asymmetrically. While Vorik committed his forces to a grinding assault, trading casualties for incremental gains, Garrett did something different. He identified the fortress's critical vulnerabilities: power generation, water supply, communications relay. Then he launched a series of small raids, surgical strikes that didn't try to take ground, just deny the enemy their advantages. Cut their power, poison their water, jam their communications. The fortress defenders had to respond, pulling troops from the perimeter to secure their infrastructure, which created gaps. Small ones, temporary, but gaps nonetheless. Garrett sent his infiltration team through, not to fight, to exfiltrate. His virtual soldiers moved like ghosts, using confusion and chaos as cover. They reached the detention block, freed the hostages, and evacuated before the fortress defenders even realized what had happened. Total casualties: 4 wounded, 0 killed. Vorik's assault, meanwhile, had bogged down in the fortress's outer defenses. His casualties mounted: 50, 70, 100. By the time his forces finally breached the detention block, the hostages were already gone. The hologram faded, Silence filled the command chamber. High Elder Nissa studied the tactical display, her expression unreadable. The human achieved the objective with minimal loss. Vorik Kane achieved nothing but casualties. She turned to face the assembled witnesses. Victory to Garrett Stone. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some cheered, others argued. But underneath it all, Garrett heard something new. Respect. Vorik's face contorted with rage. He cheated. Those tactics are dishonorable. Those tactics, Nissa interrupted coldly. 1. Perhaps if you spent less time worrying about honor and more time studying actual warfare, your virtual soldiers would still be alive. It was the closest thing to a rebuke Garrett had heard from the High Elder, and it hit Vorik like a physical blow. As the witnesses filed out, several neutral clan leaders approached Garrett, offered cautious congratulations, asked questions about his tactical thinking. These were warriors who'd spent lifetimes mastering their craft, and they recognized competence when they saw it. Garrett answered their questions politely, but his attention was on Vorik. The larger alien stood alone at his command station, staring at the empty holographic space where his assault had failed. And Garrett saw something in those 4 eyes that made his combat instincts scream. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That night, there was a reception. Formal. Ceremonial. The kind of political theater Garrett had always hated. He stood in an antechamber off the main hall, adjusting the formal Thane battle attire they'd given him. Deep purple fabric with silver clan markings. It fit reasonably well, though it had been tailored for someone with a less scarred torso. Ilara entered wearing ceremonial robes that took his breath away. Silver and purple flowing together, her hair unbound and cascading over her shoulders. She looked like something from a legend. "You clean up well," Garrett said. "As do you." She approached, reaching up to adjust his collar. "Though you look uncomfortable." "I spent years in uniform. You'd think I'd be used to formal wear by now. Military uniforms serve a purpose. This," she gestured at the elaborate robes, "is purely for show." "Your father must have hated these things." Something flickered across her face. "He did. Used to complain constantly." Her hand lingered on his collar. "You remind me of him sometimes. The way you think, the way you see through pretense to what matters." "I'm not sure that's a compliment." "It is." Her voice went soft. "My father was a good man, Garrett. Flawed, stubborn, too secretive for his own good. But he genuinely cared about his people, about doing the right thing even when it cost him. That's why they killed him." "Yes." She met his eyes. "And why we have to stop them. Whatever happens in the vault tomorrow, whatever we find there." A tremendous explosion shook the building. Garrett's combat reflexes took over. He grabbed Ilara, pulled her down, shielded her body with his own as the ceiling rained debris. Screams echoed from the reception hall. Alarms shrieked. The acrid smell of explosives filled the air. "Stay down," Garrett ordered, already moving toward the door. The reception hall was chaos. Bodies on the floor, smoke obscuring vision, the injured crying out, and in the center, a crater where the ceremonial dais had been. Bomb, planted ahead of time, detonated during the reception when maximum casualties were guaranteed. Garrett's training kicked in. Assess, triage, respond. He was moving through the smoke, checking bodies, directing the uninjured to help the wounded when he saw her. Ilara had followed him despite his order, was helping an elderly clan leader to safety, and above her, a section of ceiling was cracking, failing. Garrett ran. He hit Ilara in a tackle that sent them both sprawling. The ceiling section crashed down exactly where she'd been standing. Chunks of stone, the size of fists, rained around them. One caught Garrett in the back between his shoulder blades. Pain exploded white-hot down his spine. He felt something crack. Then another impact, this one against his ribs. The same ribs Draven had worked over in the arena. He heard bone break. Felt it. Then darkness rushed in, warm and final. He woke to pain, not the sharp, immediate agony of fresh injury. This was deeper. Bone deep. The kind of pain that meant serious damage. Garrett tried to move and immediately regretted it. His entire torso felt like one massive bruise wrapped around a framework of broken glass. "Don't," Ilara's voice, close by. The healer said, "You need to stay still." He managed to open his eyes, found himself in a medical chamber lying on something that molded to his body. Ilara sat beside him, her face pale, eyes red-rimmed. "How bad?" His voice came out as a rasp. 3 broken ribs, fractured vertebra, severe contusions across your back, internal bleeding that they managed to stop. Her hand found his, gripped tight. "Your heart stopped twice during surgery. But you're alive. Because you protected me. Again." Tears tracked down her face. "Why do you keep doing that?" "Not sure." The words felt heavy. Maybe I'm tired of watching people die when I could prevent it. She said nothing, but her grip tightened. A healer entered, checked Garrett's vitals with instruments he didn't recognize. The prognosis wasn't good. Fractured vertebra required time to heal properly. Time they didn't have. The trial of the vault was scheduled for tomorrow, the healer said flatly. But moving too soon risks permanent damage. Paralysis. Death. Then we postpone, Alara began. No. Garrett's voice was firm despite the pain. We don't postpone. Vorik will use it as proof I'm unworthy. The council will dissolve the oath, and you'll lose everything. I don't care about... I do. He met her eyes. Your father died protecting what's in that vault. We're not letting his sacrifice be for nothing. I'll do the trial. You can barely move. I've fought in worse condition. It wasn't entirely a lie. At the siege of Talon Station, he'd commanded for 18 hours with a piece of shrapnel lodged in his kidney, had passed out twice from blood loss, but kept giving orders. But that had been 6 years ago. He'd been younger then, stronger. Now trying to sit up felt like dying. The healer gave him injections, sophisticated pain management that let him move without passing out, temporary bone reinforcement that would hold for maybe 6 hours before catastrophic failure. It would have to be enough. That night, as Alara helped him into the formal attire required for the vault trial, she finally asked the question that had been building between them. When this is over, when we've stopped Vorik and secured the weapon, what will you do? Garrett considered. A week ago, the answer would have been simple. Get back to his ship, find another quiet planet, try again to disappear. But now I don't know, he admitted. The oath binds me for a year. After that, you're free to leave. Her hand stilled on his sleeve. The blade chose you, but you didn't choose this. I won't hold you here against your will. And if I wanted to stay, she looked up, hope and fear warring in her eyes, then I would welcome it. But Garrett, I need you to understand something. My life is here. My duty is to my people, my clan. I can't leave Sarath. Not even for... She stopped. Not even for what? He asked gently. Not even for feelings I have no right to. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. You've been here less than a month. We barely know each other. And yet I find myself... A comm unit beeped. High Elder Nissa's voice filled the chamber. The council has granted a brief extension given Oath Shield Stone's injuries. The trial of the vault will commence in 5 days. Both Oath Shield and Lady must be present. No exceptions. The moment broke. Alara stepped back, professional mask settling into place. But her hand found his one more time. Squeezed. Whatever happens, she said, thank you for giving my house hope when we had none. Thank me when we survived this. 5 days of recovery passed in a blur of pain and healing. The temporary bone reinforcement held but barely. Garrett could move, could walk, but every step reminded him that his body was operating on borrowed time. The healers had done what they could, but some damage ran too deep. On the morning of the trial, Captain Rhys Torren arrived at the fortress. Garrett's old colonial marine buddy had settled on Sarath 2 years ago, running cargo between the outer colonies. Stocky, gray-bearded, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of too many years in space. He found Garrett in the training hall going through slow weapon forms. Heard you got yourself into trouble, Rhys said by way of greeting. Story of my life. Garrett lowered his practice sword. What are you doing here? Heard through the network that a certain retired officer was making waves. Thought I'd check in, make sure you hadn't gotten yourself killed. Rhys's eyes traveled over Garrett's bandaged torso. Looks like you came close. Close only counts in orbital strikes. Still quoting the manual, I see. Rhys's expression sobered. This trial today, it's serious business. You need backup, you call me. I've got the Ghost sitting in the outer docks. Can be airborne in 5 minutes. Garrett gripped his friend's shoulder. Appreciated, but this is something I need to do myself. Figured you'd say that, but the offer stands. Rhys paused. She's worth it, this Alara. Garrett thought about that. About the woman who'd trusted him with her house's survival, who'd spent 5 days nursing him back to something resembling health, who looked at him like he was more than just a broken soldier running from his ghosts. Yeah, he said quietly. She is. Rhys nodded. Then don't screw it up. Dawn came gray and cold. The entrance to the Thane ancestral vault was carved into the mountain's heart, massive doors of stone inlaid with silver that had weathered 4 centuries. High Elder Nissa stood before them, flanked by the full council. Vorik waited to one side, expression unreadable. Garrett could feel the fracture in his spine with each step. The pain medications were wearing off faster than the healers predicted. probably because his human metabolism processed them differently than Serath physiology. He'd give himself 4 hours, maybe less. The trial of the vault, Nissa announced, tests whether the Oath Shield can access the sacred places of his clan. Lady Alara and Garrett Stone will enter together. They will retrieve the Heartstone, an artifact left by the first Thane Lord. Return with it, and the trial is complete. And if they cannot open the vault, Vorik asked, then the oath is false and all claims are void. Nissa's gaze settled on Garrett. This is your final test, human. Prove the blade chose wisely. Alara placed her palm against a reader set into the stone. Ancient mechanisms recognized her genetic pattern. Gears older than some civilizations began to turn. Your turn, she said to Garrett. He drew the Ironheart blade, pressed its edge against his palm until blood welled, pressed his bleeding hand beside Alara's. The doors recognized the combination. Thane bloodline and sworn blade together. They opened with a sound like thunder. Inside was darkness, ancient, deep, the kind of darkness that had never known light. Garrett and Alara stepped through. The doors closed behind them with terrible finality. For a moment they stood in absolute black. Then lights began to activate, not torches or primitive illumination. Advanced technology preserved for centuries coming to life at their presence. The vault revealed itself in sections. It was enormous, a cathedral carved from living stone walls covered in silver script that told the history of House Thawing. Artifacts lined alcoves, weapons, armor, treasures from conquests and alliances spanning generations. And at the center, on a raised platform, something that made Garrett's blood run cold. Worldbreaker. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. No gun barrel, no missile ports. It was a sphere maybe 20 feet in diameter, hovering in a containment field that crackled with barely contained energy. The surface was smooth, featureless, but Garrett could feel the power radiating from it. Enough power to crack a planet's crust, or rebuild it from ash. By all the ancestors, Alara breathed, it's real. Movement caught Garrett's eye. A holographic projector activated, and a figure appeared beside the sphere. Lord Kael Thane, Alara's father. The recording was time-stamped, 3 days before his death. If you're seeing this, the hologram said, then I am dead, and you have accessed the vault with an oath shield I never met. Kael's expression was grave. I pray that whoever wears the blade is worthy, because what I'm about to tell you will change everything. Alara's hand found Garrett's gripping tight. Kael continued, Worldbreaker is not just a weapon. It's the terraforming device our ancestors used to make Serath habitable. Every 500 years, the planet requires a pulse, a recalibration of its magnetic field and atmospheric composition. Without it, Serath will slowly die. We're due for the pulse, Kael said, in 15 years. Garrett felt the implications settling like lead in his stomach. The Orthanan Consortium discovered this. They've been trying to access the vault for a decade using bribed council members and eventually outright assassination attempts. They want Worldbreaker not to save Serath, but to sell its destructive capabilities to the highest bidder. The hologram's eyes seemed to look directly at them. I couldn't let that happen. So I prepared a failsafe. If I die before the next pulse, the vault will seal permanently. Only my genetic heir. He looked at where Alara stood, and her chosen oath shield can open it again. Trust each other. Stop Orthanan. And when the time comes, use Worldbreaker for its true purpose. Not destruction, salvation. The recording flickered. I'm sorry, Alara, for the secrets, for the burden, for leaving you to face this alone. Kael's voice broke. But I had to protect you, and I had to protect our world. May the ancestors guide you both. The hologram faded. Alara was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. Garrett pulled her close, let her grieve against his chest while ancient lights flickered around them. He didn't abandon you, Garrett said quietly. He was trying to save you. I know, but... Her voice muffled against his shoulder. I've spent 6 months hating him for keeping secrets, and all along he was protecting me. That's what fathers do. They stood like that for a long moment. Then Alara straightened, wiping her eyes. The Heartstone, she said. We need to retrieve it, and... The lights changed, red now. Warning, and Garrett heard the sound of the vault doors opening behind them. He spun, pain lancing through his spine, hand already reaching for his blade. Vorik stepped through, flanked by a dozen armed soldiers. But these weren't Serath warriors. Their armor was wrong. Off-world manufacture. Corporate security. Orthanan. I apologize for the deception, Vorik said, not sounding apologetic at all. But thank you for opening the vault. That saved considerable time and effort. Garrett's blade came up. How long have you been working for them? 5 years. Ever since my clan's resources dried up and I needed funding to maintain our status. Vorik's four eyes were cold. Orthenon offered a simple contract. Help them acquire Worldbreaker, receive enough credits to rebuild Kane Holdings and ensure our future prosperity. You sold out your entire planet for money, Alara spat. I secured my clan's survival. There's a difference, Oblivious. Vorik gestured and two of the soldiers moved forward, grabbing Alara before Garrett could react. Now, Lady Thane, you're going to activate Worldbreaker. The genetic lock requires your bloodline. I'd rather die. That can be arranged. But first, let's see if the human has any fight left in him. Vorik drew his own blade, stepped toward Garrett. Every combat instinct Garrett possessed screamed at him to attack, to fight. But his body was held together by temporary medical fixes and sheer stubbornness. Against a healthy Vorik, he'd last maybe 30 seconds, and then they'd kill Alara. Garrett looked at her, saw the fear in her eyes, the trust, the desperate hope that he'd find a way out of this. He couldn't fail again. Garrett lowered his blade. No, Alara cried. Garrett, don't. You win, Garrett said to Vorik. Take Worldbreaker. Just let her go. Garrett, please. I'm not watching you die. He met her eyes. Not for this, not for anything. Vorik smiled. How touching and foolish. Did you really think I'd honor a bargain with a human? He nodded to his soldiers. They dragged Alara toward the containment field, forcing her hand against the genetic reader. The field dropped. Worldbreaker hummed to life power building, and Vorik turned back to Garrett. As for you, Oath Shield, I'm afraid your services are no longer required. Kill him. The soldiers raised their weapons. Garrett had maybe 3 seconds to act. His spine was fractured. His ribs were broken. His body was held together by spite and medication. But he'd been a colonial Marine for nearly 3 decades. And Marines didn't quit. He moved, not toward the soldiers, toward the vault controls beside the door. His hands slammed down on the emergency seal mechanism the one Lord Kale had installed as a failsafe. Massive doors began to close. Slowly. Too slowly. The soldiers fired. Energy bolts sizzled past Garrett's head. One caught his shoulder, spinning him around. Pain exploded, but he kept his hand on the control, forcing the mechanism to engage. Stop him, Vorik roared. But Garrett had already activated the final protocol. The one Lord Kyle had designed for exactly this scenario. Complete lockdown. Once initiated, the vault would seal for 24 hours. No exceptions. No overrides. The soldiers were halfway to him when the secondary doors crashed down between them, trapping Vorik, his mercenaries Alara and Garrett inside, but separated. Garrett on one side, them on the other. Garrett slid down the wall, blood spreading across his chest from the energy bolt wound. He could see Alara through the transparent section of the door, see her screaming his name, see her trying to reach him. Vorik was yelling at his soldiers, ordering them to breach the door. But it was solid stone, 3 feet thick, designed to withstand orbital bombardment. 24 hours. Garrett pulled himself up. Every movement agony. His calm was dead crushed in the fighting. The vault's communication systems were offline as part of the lockdown protocol. He was alone, wounded, possibly dying. And on the other side of that door, Vorik had Alara and the most dangerous weapon in the sector. Garrett's vision blurred. Blood loss. Shock. His body finally giving up after being pushed beyond all reasonable limits. As consciousness faded, his last thought was of Navarra, of 200 Marines who trusted him, of how he'd failed them, and now he'd failed Alara too. The darkness took him, and for once he didn't fight it. Pain woke him, not the sharp, immediate agony of fresh wounds. This was deeper, the kind of pain that came from a body pushed past its breaking point, held together by nothing more than stubborn will and the refusal to quit. Garrett opened his eyes to darkness. For a moment, panic clawed at his chest. Was he blind? Had the energy bolt damaged more than just his shoulder? But then his vision adjusted, and he realized he was still in the vault. Still on the wrong side of the sealed door. Still bleeding. His internal chronometer, a habit from decades of military service, told him 6 hours had passed, maybe 7, which meant he had 17 hours before the lockdown released. 17 hours for Vorik to figure out how to activate Worldbreaker. 17 hours for Alara to run out of time. Garrett tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. His spine screamed in protest. The temporary bone reinforcement had failed exactly as the healers warned. Moving felt like someone was driving hot knives between his vertebrae. But lying here waiting to die felt worse. He'd failed at Novara. Failed 200 Marines who trusted him to bring them home. Spent 2 years running from that failure, trying to bury it under distance and isolation. He wasn't running anymore. Garrett braced himself against the wall and pulled himself upright. The movement sent white-hot agony through his entire body. Sweat broke out across his forehead. His vision grayed at the edges. But he stood. The vault around him was filled with artifacts from 4 centuries of Thane history. Weapons, armor, treasures. And somewhere in this collection there had to be something useful. He moved slowly, each step a battle against his failing body. His right leg dragged slightly nerve damage from the fractured vertebra. His left shoulder was a mass of burned tissue where the energy bolt had caught him. Blood had soaked through his formal attire, turning the purple fabric nearly black. But his hands still worked. His mind still functioned. And he still had the Ironheart blade. The sword had fallen during the fighting. Garrett found it lying near the door, silver runes gleaming in the dim light. When he picked it up, warmth flooded through him. Not healing the blade couldn't repair broken bones or burn flesh, but it offered something else. Strength, determination, the accumulated will of 16 generations of Thane warriors who'd faced impossible odds and refused to yield. Garrett clutched the blade and kept moving. Lord Kale's hologram had mentioned a failsafe, a way to seal the vault permanently if it fell into the wrong hands, which meant there had to be controls, a mechanism, something Kale could access in an emergency. It took Garrett 2 hours to find it. Hidden behind a false panel in the wall, accessible only to someone who knew where to look, a secondary control system separate from the main vault doors. And etched into the stone beside it, instructions in both Serath script and what Garrett recognized as Old Earth standard. Lord Kale had planned for the possibility that a human oath shield might need this knowledge. The instructions were clear, brutal, and absolutely final. If the vault was compromised, if Worldbreaker fell into hostile hands, there was one way to prevent catastrophe. Flood the chamber with a specific radiation that would render the device inert, permanently unusable, by anyone, for any purpose, including saving Serath in 15 years when the planet needed its terraforming pulse. The cost was clear: destroy the weapon to save it from Orthanen and condemn Serath to a slow death. Let Vorik take it and watch it become a tool for planetary genocide sold to the highest bidder. Garrett's hand hovered over the control. Through the transparent section of the sealed door, he could see movement on the other side. Vorik's soldiers working on Worldbreaker. Alara held at gunpoint, forced to interface with the genetic locks. She looked small, fragile. But even from here, Garrett could see the defiance in her posture. She was buying time, slowing the process, gambling that help would come, gambling on him. Garrett pulled his hand back from the radiation controls. There had to be another way. His eyes fell on a different section of the wall. Ventilation shafts. The vault needed air circulation. Even ancient tombs required basic life support. The shafts were small, designed for airflow, not human passage. But desperation made people creative. Garrett studied the nearest shaft opening, maybe 2 feet in diameter. He'd never fit through it. Not with his shoulders, definitely not with broken ribs and a fractured spine. But he didn't need to fit through. He just needed to fit his hand through. And the Ironheart blade. The plan formed in his mind with the clarity that only came from having no other options. It was insane. The chances of success were maybe 1 in 100. The chances of survival even lower. But 1% was better than 0. Garrett positioned himself at the ventilation shaft and began to work. On the other side of the sealed door, Alara's hands shook as she interfaced with Worldbreaker's control systems. She'd been stalling for 9 hours, claiming the genetic locks were more complex than Vorik understood, that her father had implemented additional safeguards, that rushing the activation sequence risked catastrophic failure. All lies, but convincing ones. Vorik paced behind her, 4 eyes burning with impatience. How much longer? These systems are 4 centuries old, Alara said, keeping her voice steady. One mistake, and Worldbreaker becomes a very expensive piece of useless metal. Then don't make mistakes. The Orthanen soldiers watched her with the cold professionalism of corporate mercenaries. They didn't care about Serath politics or ancient houses or sacred oaths. They cared about their paychecks and completing the job, which made them predictable, reliable, dangerous. Alara's eyes drifted to the sealed door, to the section where she'd last seen Garrett fall, blood spreading across his chest. He'd sealed the vault to buy her time, sacrificed himself to stop Vorik from escaping with the weapon. She'd watched him go down, watched the light fade from his eyes as consciousness left him. And she'd never told him that somewhere between the sword choosing him and the trials and the quiet moments tending his wounds, she'd fallen in love with a broken man from a distant world who'd stumbled into her life by accident. Never told him that she didn't want him to leave when the year was done, that she wanted him to stay. Not because of duty or oaths or ancient laws, because he made her laugh, made her feel safe, made her believe that maybe, just maybe, House Thane had a future worth fighting for. And now he was dead. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away. Vorik couldn't see weakness, couldn't know how close to breaking she was. "The genetic lock is releasing," she said, fingers moving across the holographic interface. "But the weapon requires a verification code. My father's personal cipher." "Then enter it." "I don't know it." That part was true. Kale had never shared his deepest secrets, had died protecting them. Vorik's hand closed around her throat, squeezed, not enough to crush, just enough to make breathing difficult. "You're testing my patience, Lady Thane." "Kill me," Alara gasped, "and you'll never activate the device. The genetic lock requires ongoing verification. My heartbeat, my neural patterns. I die, and it seals permanently." Vorik's grip loosened, but his eyes promised violence. "You'll cooperate, eventually. Everyone does." A sound interrupted them. Metallic, scraping. The soldiers raised their weapons, searching for the source. It was coming from above, from the ventilation system. Then a blade punched through the grating, silver, gleaming, unmistakable. The Ironheart blade, and wrapped around its hilt a bloody hand. Garrett's hand. Getting his arm through the ventilation shaft had taken 2 hours of agonizing work. Dislocating his shoulder to make it fit. Ignoring the screaming protest of broken ribs as he contorted his body into angles it was never meant to achieve. Pushing the blade ahead of him through the narrow passage, using it as a guide and anchor. The pain was transcendent, beyond anything Garrett had experienced. Beyond Novara. Beyond every wound and injury from 28 years of warfare. But he'd made it through. Now he hung suspended in the ventilation shaft, one arm extended through the grating blade in hand. His vision swam. His body was shutting down, systems failing one by one. He had minutes left, maybe less, but minutes were enough. "Garrett," Alara's voice filled with desperate hope. Vorik's face appeared below the grating, staring up in disbelief. "Impossible, you should be dead." "Should be," Garrett agreed, his voice barely a whisper. "But I've got a bad habit of not dying when I'm supposed to." He dropped the blade. It fell through the air, spinning silver light, catching on ancient runes. Alara's hand shot out, catching it by the hilt with the instinct of someone trained since childhood. The moment her fingers closed around the blade, it pulsed. Bright, blinding. The Ironheart had chosen her now, recognized her as both bloodline and warrior, the full power of the ancestral weapon flooding through her. Vorik lunged, but Alara was already moving. The blade sang through the air faster than thought, cutting through the bonds that held her. The Orthonan soldiers opened fire, but she was dancing between their shots, the blade deflecting energy bolts with impossible precision. This wasn't just Alara fighting. This was 16 generations of Thane warriors, their skill and knowledge channeling through her, teaching her, guiding her. She was magnificent. Garrett watched from above, pride and pain warring in his chest. This was what the blade had always wanted. Not him. He'd just been the bridge, the catalyst, the outsider who could open the door for the rightful heir. His vision grayed. His grip on the ventilation shaft weakened. He fell. Not far. The shaft was only 12 feet above the floor. But for a man with a fractured spine, broken ribs, and a dislocated shoulder, it was far enough. Garrett hit the ground and felt something fundamental give way. His legs went numb. No pain, just absence. The kind of absence that meant permanent damage. He'd known it was coming. The healers had warned him. Push too hard, move too much, and the vertebral damage would progress from fracture to severed nerve. He'd pushed, and now he'd pay the price. But above him, Alara was winning. The last Orthanan soldier fell. Vorik stood alone facing her, his own blade drawn. "This changes nothing," Vorik snarled. "Worldbreaker is already activated. In 10 minutes, the weapon will be fully online. I'll take it, leave this planet, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." "You're wrong," Alara's voice was cold. "Final. There's everything I can do." She attacked. The duel was brief. Brutal. Vorik was skilled, experienced, powerful. But Alara had the blade, had the ancestors, had 4 centuries of accumulated fury at what had been done to her house. She drove him back, step by step, until he stood at the edge of the containment field, Worldbreaker humming behind him. "Yield," Alara commanded. "Never." Blood ran from a dozen cuts on Vorik's body. I've sacrificed too much. Come too far. For what money status? Alara's blade pressed against his throat. Was it worth it, Vorik? Was it worth betraying everything our people stand for? Something broke in Vorik's expression. The facade crumbled, and beneath it, Garrett saw not a villain, just a desperate man who'd made terrible choices. My daughter. Vorik's voice cracked. Kira, she's 8 years old. She has genetic cascade syndrome. Terminal. The Orthonin promised treatment. A cure. In exchange for Worldbreaker. Silence fell across the vault. Alara's blade didn't move, but her expression shifted. A child. They have her in their medical facility off-world. If I don't deliver the weapon, they'll stop treatment. She'll die within weeks. Tears tracked down Vorik's face. 4 eyes, all of them wet. I'm not a traitor. I'm a father trying to save his child. And I've damned myself in the process. Garrett tried to speak. Failed. His body wasn't responding anymore. Blood loss. Shock. The cascade of failures that came from pushing human physiology beyond its limits. But he'd heard Vorik's confession. Understood it in his bones. The things we do for the people we love. The prices we pay. The lines we cross. Alara lowered her blade. There's another way, she said quietly. Garrett woke in a medical chamber. This was becoming a disturbing pattern. His body felt distant, disconnected. The pain was gone, replaced by a strange floating sensation that suggested heavy medication, or nerve damage so severe his brain had given up processing signals. Alara sat beside his bed, still wearing her combat-stained formal robes. Her silver hair was unbound, falling around her face. She looked exhausted, beautiful, and impossibly sad. Hey, Garrett's voice came out as a rasp. Hey, her smile didn't reach her eyes. You're awake. The healers weren't sure you would be. How bad? She didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. Your legs, she finally said. The nerve damage was too severe. Even with our most advanced medical technology, they can't repair it. Garrett absorbed this. He'd known it was coming, had felt it happen, but knowing and accepting were different things. Worldbreaker, he asked? Secured. Vorik helped us shut down the activation sequence. The weapon is stable. Alara's hand found his. He surrendered himself to the council, confessed everything, the Orthanin connection, the bribes, the assassination by his daughter. We negotiated her release. Earth has medical technology more advanced than Orthanin's corporate facilities. She's being transferred to a treatment center in the Sol system. Alara's thumb traced circles on his palm. Genetic cascade syndrome is curable with the right intervention. She'll live. And Vorik, awaiting trial. The council is divided. Some want execution. Others argue he was coerced through his child, that a father's love, however misguided, deserves mercy. Garrett thought about that, about the choices people made when the stakes were their children's lives, about how far you'd go, how many lines you'd cross. He deserves mercy, Garrett said quietly. I thought you'd say that. Alara's smile was genuine this time, small, tired, but real. You're a good man, Garrett Stone. I'm a soldier who can't walk. You're the man who protected me, who honored his oath when he could have walked away, who sacrificed everything to protect a planet that isn't even his home. She leaned down, pressed her forehead against his. The gesture was intimate, tender, and it broke something open in Garrett's chest. I never told you, Alara whispered, when you sealed the vault. When I thought you were dying, I never got to say, I know, Garrett interrupted gently. I know. You can't know. I barely understand it myself. You've been here barely a month. We've spent most of that time arguing, or fighting, or bleeding. It makes no sense that I would... She stopped, took a breath. That I would love you. The words hung in the air between them. Garrett's hand tightened on hers. It makes perfect sense. You're brilliant, fierce, stubborn as hell, and you see something in me I thought died at Novara. What worth, purpose, a reason to keep fighting. His voice went rough. I came here to die quietly. You gave me a reason to live loudly. Alara kissed him. It was gentle, careful of his injuries. But beneath the tenderness was something deeper. A promise. A choice. When they broke apart, both had tears on their faces. The healers say you'll need extensive rehabilitation, Alara said. Months, maybe years, learning to adapt to function. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. And after, when the year is done and your oath is fulfilled, Her voice was barely a whisper. Will you stay? Or will you go back to your bush ship and find that quiet mountain you wanted? Garrett looked at her, really looked, at the woman who'd fought beside him, who trusted him with her house's survival, who just confessed love to a broken soldier. I'm not going anywhere, he said. The blade chose me. You chose me. And for the first time in 2 years, I'm choosing something for myself. I'm choosing you. Choosing this. Choosing to stay. The smile that broke across Alara's face was like sunrise after a long night. Outside the chamber, Garrett could hear voices. High Elder Nissa coordinating with Earth authorities. Council members debating Vorik's fate. Medical staff discussing his treatment of options. The world kept turning. Problems remained unsolved. Challenges waited around every corner. But for this moment in this small medical chamber, Garrett Stone had everything he needed. A purpose, a partner, and a future he'd never dared to imagine. 3 weeks later, Garrett attended Vorik's trial. They'd fitted him with a mobility chair. Advanced Sarath technology that responded to neural commands, allowing him to move despite his paralyzed legs. It would never replace walking, but it gave him independence. The council chamber was packed, every major house represented, every political faction present. The trial of Vorik Kane had become a referendum on justice, mercy, and what it meant to protect the things you loved. Vorik stood in the center, chains around his wrists. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The proud champion, reduced to a father who'd gambled everything and lost. High Elder Nissa presided. Vorik Kane, you stand accused of conspiracy, treason, and murder. How do you plead? Guilty. Vorik's voice was steady. To all charges, I accept full responsibility for my actions. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The penalty for treason is death, Nissa continued. However extenuating circumstances have been presented, you acted to save your daughter's life. While this does not excuse your crimes, it provides context. She turned to Alara. Lady Thane, as the one most wronged by the accused, you have the right to speak for or against clemency. Alara stood. She'd spent the past 3 weeks helping Garrett with rehabilitation while simultaneously managing her house's recovery. She looked tired, but strong. My father taught me that strength without mercy is tyranny, she said, and mercy without justice is weakness. Vorik Kane committed terrible crimes, betrayed our people, worked with those who would enslave us, and for that he must be punished. Vorik's head bowed, but, Alara continued, he also showed me something important, that even good people make terrible choices when faced with impossible situations, that love for our children can drive us to desperate acts, and that redemption is possible even for those who have fallen furthest. Nisha, she met Vorik's eyes. I advocate for life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. Let him serve his people from confinement. Let him work to undo the damage he's caused, and let him see his daughter grow up knowing that mercy exists even for those who thought they deserved none. The council debated for hours, but in the end, Alara's words carried weight. Vorik would live, would serve, would spend the next 20 years in confined service to House Thane, using his strategic mind and combat expertise to help rebuild what he'd nearly destroyed. And his daughter would receive the treatment she needed. Justice and mercy, together. After the trial, Vorik approached Garrett's mobility chair. The proud warrior looked broken, remade, different. I don't deserve this, Vorik said quietly. Your mercy, her mercy. Probably not, Garrett agreed, but none of us deserve most of what we get in life. The question is what you do with it. I'll spend every day trying to earn it. Good, because we're going to need your help. Garrett gestured at the chamber. The council is fractured. Orthanan is still out there, and Sarath needs defenders who understand how corporations think. Vorik's 4 eyes widened. You're offering me a chance to help. I'm offering you a chance to choose differently, to be the man you wanted to be before desperation made you compromise. Something like hope flickered across Vorik's face. I won't fail this time. See that you don't. Vorik nodded, accepted the chains that would bind him for the next 2 decades, and walked toward his future with something he hadn't had in years. A second chance. 6 months passed. Garrett's rehabilitation progressed slowly. His body would never fully recover, would never walk again. But he learned to adapt, to function, to live with limitations, and discovered that strength came in forms he'd never considered. House Thane rebuilt. With Vorik's strategic advice and Garrett's military experience, they established defenses that made their territories secure, formed alliances with neutral clans, positioned themselves as mediators rather than warriors. Alara led with wisdom that reminded everyone of her father, and with Garrett at her side, she navigated politics with a steadiness that impressed even skeptical council members. The Earth Alliance formalized diplomatic relations with Sir Surath. Trade agreements followed, cultural exchanges, a new era of cooperation that neither species had imagined possible. Captain Rhys Torrin visited twice during those months, bringing news from the frontier and reminders of the life Garrett had left behind. Each time Rhys looked at Garrett and Alara together and nodded with quiet understanding. "You found what you were looking for," Rhys said on his second visit. "I wasn't looking for anything," Garrett replied. "That's usually when we find it." And Worldbreaker remained sealed in the vault, waiting for the day 15 years hence when Sarath would need its life-giving pulse. Garrett sat on the balcony of the Thane fortress watching ships descend through Sarath's atmosphere. Among them was a medical transport carrying a small passenger. Kira, Vorik's daughter. 8 years old now, Kira coming to see her Trian for the first time in 7 months. "Are you ready?" Alara asked, joining him on the balcony. She wore simple robes today, her hair braided in a style that reminded Garrett of the first time he'd seen her, fighting in the rain, defiant against impossible odds. "Ready for what?" "To meet her, Kira." Alara's hand rested on his shoulder. "Vorik asked if we would be present, said she wanted to meet the people who saved her father's life. We didn't save his life, we spared it. There's a difference. Not to an 8-year-old who gets to grow up with a father." The ship landed, and a small figure emerged. Kira was beautiful. Violet skin marked with silver patterns that matched her father's, silver hair and elaborate braids. But her eyes, 4 of them arranged in vertical pairs, held a child's innocence. Curiosity. Wonder. Vorik was there, chains removed for the visit, kneeling to embrace his daughter. The hardened warrior dissolved into tears. The proud champion became just a father holding his child. And Garrett felt something shift in his chest. At Navarra, he'd lost 200 colonial Marines, young men and women barely old enough to understand what war meant. He'd carried their deaths for 2 years, like stones around his neck. But here, watching Vorik and Kira reunite, Garrett realized something. He couldn't bring back the dead, couldn't undo his failures. But he could honor their memory by choosing differently going forward, by saving lives instead of leading them into darkness, by building instead of destroying, by loving instead of running. Kira looked up from her father's embrace and spotted Garrett. She approached with the fearless curiosity of a child who'd been told stories but needed to confirm them herself. "You're the human," she said, "the one who held the Ironheart blade." "I am. Father says you're very brave, that you gave up everything to protect Lady Alara." Garrett glanced at Alara, who smiled. "I did what was necessary." "Are you sad that you can't walk anymore?" Children, always asking the questions adults danced around. "Sometimes," Garrett admitted, "but I'm also grateful, because if I could walk, I might have run away when things got difficult, and then I would have missed all of this." He gestured at the fortress, at Alara, at the world he'd accidentally made his home. Kira considered this with the seriousness of a child processing complex truths. Then she reached out and took his hand. "I'm glad you stayed," she said. "Father says you showed him that mercy is stronger than revenge, and that sometimes the bravest thing is choosing to forgive." Out of the mouths of children, Garrett squeezed her hand gently. "Your father is a wise man, and lucky to have you." "I know," she grinned. "Will you teach me about Earth, about where humans come from? Father says your people are very different, but also very similar." "I'd be honored." As Kira ran back to her father, chattering about everything she wanted to learn, Alara leaned down and kissed the top of Garrett's head. "You're going to be a wonderful uncle," she murmured. "Uncle? Well, we can't very well have Vorik's daughter calling you the human forever. And since you're bound to House Thane, and Vorik is bound in service to us, that makes us something like family." Family. Garrett had spent 30 years in the Colonial Marines, had brothers and sisters in arms scattered across 100 stations. But he'd never had family. Not really. Not the kind that stayed through injuries and failures and the long, slow work of healing. "I like that," he said softly. "Good, because there's something else you should know." Lara's hand moved to her abdomen, rested there with a tenderness that made Garrett's heart stop. "You're not, I am." Her smile was radiant, terrified, hopeful. 3 months. The healers confirmed it this morning. A child, Garrett. Ours. The world tilted. A child. Human and Sarath blood combined. Proof that two species separated by light years of space could build something together. Something new. Something precious. "Are you sure?" Garrett's voice came out strangled. "I mean, is it safe for you, the baby?" The healers say there's no reason it shouldn't be. Our genetics are compatible enough for conception. The pregnancy is progressing normally. She knelt beside his chair. I know this is fast. I know we never discussed this. But Garrett, I want this. Want to build a future with you. Want our child to grow up in a world where different peoples come together instead of tearing each other apart. Garrett pulled her close, burying his face in her silver hair. 30 years of war, 2 years of running, 1 month of accidentally finding purpose. And now this, a future he'd never imagined, a family he'd never dared hope for, a reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, the universe had a plan better than any he could have made. I want this too, he whispered against her hair. Want you, want our child, want to build something worth protecting. They held each other on the balcony while ships came and went below, while Vorik played with his daughter, soaking up every moment of their limited time together. While the sun set over mountains Garrett had once thought would be his grave. He'd come to Sarath to die quietly. Instead, he'd found life. Loud, messy, beautiful, complicated, and worth every sacrifice. 11 months after Garrett first touched the iron heart blade, a son was born. They named him Kael Garrett Thane, after Alara's father, after the human who'd become Oathshield. He was perfect. Tiny fingers that gripped with surprising strength, violet skin with subtle pink undertones, silver hair so fine it caught light like spun glass, and eyes, 4 of them arranged in Sarath pairs, that held depths of awareness no newborn should possess. He's beautiful, Vorik said, visiting with Kira to meet the newest member of their strange extended family. He's loud, Garrett corrected, bouncing the crying infant in his arms, and he has exceptional timing for needing to be changed. Alara laughed, taking Kael and settling him against her shoulder. The baby quieted immediately, making small, contented sounds. He knows his mother, she said. Smart kid. Kira approached, cautiously fascinated by the baby. Can I hold him? Under Alara's supervision, the 8-year-old cradled Kael with the seriousness of someone given a sacred trust. Vorik watched his daughter with an expression that held equal parts pride and regret. He'd missed so much of Kira's early years to ambition and desperation. But he was making different choices now, serving his sentence with dignity, rebuilding trust one day at a time, and his daughter was alive to see it. He will be a bridge, Vorik said quietly, between our peoples, between the old ways and the new. He'll be a child first, Garrett corrected. Let him grow up before we burden him with destiny. But even as he said it, Garrett understood. Kael represented something unprecedented, proof that humans and Sarath could build futures together, that love transcended species, that families could be forged from the unlikeliest materials. That night, after visitors had left and Kael finally slept, Garrett and Alara sat together in the chambers that had become their home. The iron heart blade rested on the wall, its runes glowing softly in the darkness. Do you ever regret it? Alara asked. Staying, giving up the quiet mountain you wanted, Garrett considered. He'd never built that retreat, never disappeared into isolation. His body was broken in ways that would never heal. The scars from energy bolts and broken bones would mark him forever. But he had Alara, had Kael, had found purpose in protecting a world that had become home, had learned that sometimes the greatest adventures came from accidents, from choices made in moments of crisis, from picking up a sword to save a stranger and discovering it changed everything. No regrets, he said finally. Well, maybe one. What? I regret that it took me so long to realize that running from purpose doesn't bring peace. It just brings emptiness. Alara leaned against him, careful of his limitations, and they sat in comfortable silence. Outside, Sarath's twin moons rose over mountains that had witnessed 4 centuries of Thane history, and in a cradle nearby their son slept, the first of his kind, a child of 2 worlds, a legacy built not from conquest or glory, but from love, from mercy, from the simple choice to help someone who needed it. The blade on the wall pulsed once, warm, approving. And Garrett Stone, retired colonial marine officer, reluctant Oathshield, and man who'd found family in the last place he expected, closed his eyes and slept. For the first time in 3 years, his dreams were gentle. The ghost of Navarra had finally found peace, and so had he. 5 years later, the council chamber buzzed with anticipation. Garrett sat in his mobility chair before the assembled clan leaders, Alara standing beside him. Years had given them both a quiet confidence, her silver hair now marked with the formal braids of leadership, his face weathered but peaceful in a way it hadn't been when he first arrived. The proposal is simple, Garrett said. Earth and Sarath formal military alliance, not for conquest, for mutual defense against corporate exploitation. High Elder Nissa nodded. The Orthanan Consortium still seeks revenge. An alliance makes strategic sense. It also makes moral sense, Alara added. Our peoples have much to teach each other. The vote was nearly unanimous. Afterward, as they left the chamber, Kyle ran up, 5 years old now, all energy and questions. Father, did they say yes? Are the Earth ships coming? They did, and they are. Garrett ruffled his son's silver hair. Do they all look like you? Garrett and Alara exchanged glances and laughed. Most of them, Garrett confirmed, though some might say your purple skin and 4 eyes are the weird part. Kale considered this seriously. I think we're all perfect the way we are. Vorik approached, chains finally removed, his sentence completed through exemplary service. Congratulations on your freedom, Garrett said. Thank you, though I'm not sure what to do with it. Start small, Ilara suggested. Choose to have dinner with us tonight. Choose to forgive yourself, Garrett added quietly. That's the hardest one, but also the most important. Vorik's 4 eyes glistened. You've given me so much. I'll spend my life trying to deserve it. You already do, Garrett said, because you chose to become better. That evening, their family gathered. Different species, different backgrounds, but family nonetheless. Captain Rhys Torrin raised a glass. To new beginnings. To second chances, Vorik added quietly. To family. Alara said, her hand finding Garrett's. As Garrett looked around the table, he thought about the path that had brought him here. A refueling stop that became an oath. A stranger who became a partner. A sword that chose not the strongest warrior, but the one who needed choosing most. The Ironheart blade hung on the wall, watching over them all. Outside, the first Earth ships descended through Serath's atmosphere. A new chapter beginning. And Garrett Stone, who'd come to this planet to die alone, sat surrounded by family and knew with absolute certainty that he'd found exactly where he belonged. Not in isolation, not in the quiet mountain he'd once sought, but here, in the noise and mess and beautiful chaos of building a life with people who'd chosen him, just as he'd chosen them. The blade had known all along. Sometimes the greatest adventures began with a single impulsive choice, and the greatest legacies were built not from glory but from love.